Hey guys, it's Thursday, so you know what time that is. It's time for On Social, the show that talks about everything that has to do with social media, marketing, and professional live video on the social platforms. I am here and I am joined. My name is Steve, and I'm joined back from Chicago. We've got Marty McFadden from podjam.tv. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, Steven, how are you? Great to be back.
I am doing well, and I heard you had an interesting experience when you were out there in Chicago.
Yes, we met. My first. I'm trying to get. You know what? I'm gonna forget his name. Darn it! I
Oh,
gotta
I
get.
put him on the
I got.
spot here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got his. Oh, here it is. Wait, there we go. I got it. So I was in Chicago doing a job, and the AV person I was working with watches our show. Lucas Grace is his name. He's probably. Hopefully, he's watching now. I'm mentioning his name, but Lucas met him. Had a great talk. We were hanging out talking AV and all that. So yeah, I was he was he saw the Wirecast gear I was setting up, and they recognized. I recognize that. I watch your show all the time with you and Steven and uh, Jeff. Oh my god, I'm losing it. Uh,
It's been one of them
but
days.
yeah, so that was the first time I met someone on one of these jobs that actually watches the show. So Lucas, if you're watching, great to thanks for watching. It was great to meet you, and we'll have to have him. Hopefully, we'll have to have him on the show because he was great. We're talking all kinds of AV stuff and everything, so it was great to meet him in Chicago.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you back. And we've also got Mr. Jeffrey Fitzgerald from jeffandhighdef.tv. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, it's always good to be with the gang. I think it's a wonderful time to be looking at how to improve your home studio setup. I think it's a great conversation today.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking here to see if LinkedIn is up. It doesn't appear that it is, even though Wirecast is telling me that it is. So maybe I'll have to go back
Yeah, I
and
didn't see it.
yeah, it's not going up, but I'll see what I can do with it and see what we can do for next week. But let's dive into this because I think there's a lot of people. Last week we talked about on location broadcasting. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are trying to do, to preface this for everybody, is everybody's building these home studios. Everybody wants to get, broadcasting, whether you're in a church, whether you're at a business, whether you're at school. Some of that can kind of fall into remote broadcasting, some of it can fall into on location. And so when I say remote broadcasting, you're starting to do what we do. We bring in guests from all over the world like we're doing now. Um, it gets challenging, and we've got a couple tips here, points, if you will, that Jeff, you're going to get us kicked off here.
Well, first thing you got to think about if you're going to put a studio in your office, in your home, whatever that looks like, you need to know what your internet bandwidth is going to be like. You need to know a couple different things, not just how fast it is, but whether or not you're on a shared connection, whether or not it's the type of connection that more people in your neighborhood or even your family are hopping on at a certain time. If there are periods between the peak times of the day when you're noticing a substantial decrease, a lot of times the connections will still maintain, but they will throttle them down literally variably, minute to minute, second to second, and you will find these little skips and jumps, and all of a sudden it'll freeze for a second, and you'll keep moving. But by and large, though, Steve, I think pretty much everybody these days has got a fairly decent internet connection. But it's one of these things where it's really recommended that you go to um, sites like speedtest.net and you perform just basically a good overview. Take a look at what your usage is and what the up and down speeds are. I think what do we know here? Facebook is usually about 4 megs, and there's some overhead on that, so minimum of 10 megs up to make sure you've got a decent quality connection. And but a lot of people have significantly higher, so hopefully that's not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, bandwidth, Marty, we face it everywhere. I do it in here. I do a speed test, and like even in the notes here, Jeff, you talked about speed test. Why don't you dive in a little bit deeper with that about just because you have 20 megs down does not mean you have enough bandwidth to get you out to the internet and maybe kind of dig a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about internet like a highway, the download many times these days, they want to make the people who are paying happy. So they'll build a 4 or 5 lane highway to your house. You get these crazy high numbers on download, but it's the upload you've got to pay attention to. And that usually is a 1 lane road, and sometimes it's not even paved. It depends. You could have a situation where you've got a 25 meg download and maybe a 7 meg upload. And that's why it's really important to kind of dig into the, into the speed test and those kind of analytics to kind of know consistently where are you with those things. And then the other part of it is to really kind of know what you're trying to do, right? I mean, obviously, we're broadcasting at a pretty decent clip here with the certain level of quality. If you're on a Wi-Fi network and you're really just going to start with mobile production and you're going to put your iPhone up, you want to make sure that you've got decent Wi-Fi in the area, that you're connected to a router that's not 15 years old, these kind of things. And so sometimes the use cases are a little bit different, but the big thing is to look at what does your connection look like, and every single time you have the opportunity to plug into Ethernet, that's the right answer.
Absolutely. We always recommend that. Even everything I have here in the studio, all hardwired. Even the laptops I use in front to show chat, it's a must. You got to do it. So bandwidth is key, folks. You that's where you should start before you even dive. If you're like Jeff, you mentioned about in my in most areas, bandwidth is pretty high. But honestly, out here where I'm at, dial up is still a thing, believe it or not. So those people, you're not going to be streaming live. So Marty.
Can I add something to that? I'll add something to what Jeff was saying about the bandwidth, about testing, which was very good advice. But I would also add, especially if you're doing a live streaming show, maybe from a location you don't normally work from, try to test even the same time of day as your actual show on a different day to kind of mimic network conditions. Because many times, if you're like, I'll give you an example. If you're home, like in a consumer environment, and you're just streaming Netflix, usually, maybe your particular area, your head end, is probably going to see a lot more shared bandwidth at night during prime time. And that's when your throughput goes down because everyone's sharing the same connection. And maybe during the day, it's a little lighter. So that might also be something at that particular location where network conditions can vary day to day or hour to hour. And if you can test at the same time, I think that would be very helpful. Um, the other thing is, testing. I want to certainly echo what Jeff was saying, that you can't test enough because networks, that's where a lot of it gets a little bit complicated as far as some of the throughputs and some of the choke points, especially when you're streaming. The other thing is not only just download, but make sure you're checking that upload bandwidth. That's really going to be your most important number, and frequently that's a lower number. Your download, a lot of these service providers will concentrate on giving you plenty of download bandwidth. That's what most people use. But us in the streaming business use upload, and frequently that's lower. Like for me, I'm getting close to 300 down, but I consistently get 10 to 12 up, which is for me up. That's plenty, but just be aware that's quite a difference, and they're going to put most of the bandwidth on down. So that's something you want to make sure you're checking the right upload bandwidth to make sure you have enough.
For once, I can say I have more bandwidth than you. I get like 600 down by like 30, 35 up.
Wow. No,
But
nothing
I
like that
have
here.
to. I mean, I'm paying for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm paying for it. But
Yeah.
I need to make sure that with having guests, I can have 4 guests on plus stream out to multiple destinations. I mean, you got to take all that into consideration, right? So,
Yeah, you've got a good point there, Steve, that if you are doing something where you're using, products like neural net, or you've got multi-guest, every single guest adds another little bit of that chunk that you're going to have to account for. And so that 8 to 10 meg rule of thumb is really just a thin line baseline. And that's where, when you do that, you really kind of got to think a little bit more with strategy and complexity, so that you understand that you're not going to end up finding out that you do great with the first guest you've got for 3 months, and the first time you add a second or third guest, everything stops.
no, absolutely right. Um, all right. So, speaking of guests, let's get on to that point, Marty.
Yes, and speaking of guests, I do want to recognize Lucas Grace, Media First Productions, watching us. He's the guy I met in Chicago. Great to have you with us, Lucas. Speaking of guests, that's our second point. If you're working with a guest, I can't overemphasize this enough. And normally, like if you're doing a show like we are, and we're 3 co-hosts, and we do it every week. Our setups, we're very familiar with our setups. We all test. We get on. We already know what we're doing. We're comfortable with that, knowing that we had the bandwidth, the setup, and all that stuff. So we're not testing it, and we're not rehearsing every time we get on because we've already done that. But frequently, if you're a host and you bring guests on, say if you do an interview show, and many times your guest is maybe not that well versed, or doesn't do this on a regular basis, or maybe doing it for the first time, and don't and maybe just getting on video for the first time. They have no idea what they're doing. And this applies for whether you're doing just audio only or video or whatever. Testing is critical. And not just 15 minutes before you go live, but do it a couple days at least before you go live. Meet with that person, set up a time where you have some time to go over, and then walk them through the setup, not only their technical setup, but also visually how they are, but testing their bandwidth and making sure you go through this where, some of the points that Jeff brought up, and Stephen, you brought up being hardwired. You want to go through all those different tips as far as managing their networks. Frequently, people are just going to be using Wi-Fi. That's what they're used to. They don't know that Wi-Fi is great for casual web browsing, but when you're doing streaming video or streaming audio, it could be a problem because you're relying on radio signals and you can have interruptions. And I don't think a lot of people don't realize that. I work with clients, I do podcast production and we do recording over the internet, and I'm constantly going over this kind of stuff where people have no idea that, oh, they could have an interruption, that they really need pristine connection. And that's why all three of us use wired connections, but your guests may not. So test ahead of time. That way, and frequently there's a problem that you may come up with, at least that gives you enough time to diagnose the issue and work with your guest to get whatever issue that, and they will crop up, to be able to calmly address the problem, get it ready to go. That way, when you're ready, it's show day, and when you're ready to go, especially for live shows, you still want to connect early, but hopefully you've diagnosed any major issue ahead of time so that when you do connect on the day of the show, it's just a confirmation, okay, we got connection, we're ready to go, and then we're standing by. So the last thing you want to do, and Stephen and Jeff, I know we've seen it with other people, they get on a minute before and then they have all kinds of issues and then the show doesn't go on. And a lot of these issues can be prevented if they just did a little planning ahead of time.
Well, and Jeff, you remember back when we had Lee Kelso on. I mean, he wasn't familiar with the connection that we had, and this isn't to call him out or make him look bad or anything like that, but he was not familiar with the setup, and we just kind of took the presumption that he would know how to do it. We got him on, he just couldn't get it working. Um, that's prime case as to why we should have met with him a little bit ahead of time. But I
That's
also think,
exactly right. Yeah, that was on us because we have a system that's different than other systems, and even though the methodologies are simple, pick your camera, pick your speaker and your microphone, the reality is browsers affect that. I've had a
yep,
tremendous amount of trouble when different browsers get released with how it interacts and whether or not you're using Opera or Chrome or Firefox. And so those things do happen, and it's not an ignorance thing or anything like that. It's really just you've got to go through that muscle memory and do that planning ahead of time to really find out because even something as simple as having somebody wear an earpiece, wear an earbud or two earbuds
hmm,
to eliminate the reverb and the feedback that you're going to hear when someone has the speakers up really loud trying to speak into a microphone. Those are the kind of things that for you, if you know about it, you're like, oh, okay, I just got to turn that down and need to get some headphones. But for the person that's new, that's the kind of thing that can really freak them out if it's within the interview or before the interview, things like that, because they don't know what's going on. They don't understand how that works, where the sound that's coming out of the speakers is actually going back into the microphone and it's creating a nice nasty loop that sounds horrible. So there are a lot of little things like that. And every time that you do a pre-check, I like to do mine 2 days ahead of time. And I don't go over the interview questions specifically because I don't want to lose the flavor of that moment of asking some great questions. But I have other questions that are kind of similar, and so while I'm doing the tech checks and everything, I'm actually looking for background information. If I'm going to talk to someone, one of my new clients it's an organization that places service dogs trained for PTSD veterans. Great calls and great organization. I would not ask him the same questions on Thursday that I'm going to ask in the pre-setup on Tuesday, because what I'm really looking for is to find other parts that I can speak to. Tell me about your own personal experience in the military. Were there any meaningful moments there? What was the moment that transformed you into thinking from being a service member into wanting to give back to your community? So there's a lot of places there where you can use that opportunity to really make your interview even a lot better from a content perspective, not just a tech perspective.
absolutely. And I know going forward here, Marty, George has a great comment in here about
I
that
saw that.
exact thing. If you want to take over that.
Yeah, absolutely. George Kennedy on Facebook had a great comment about this very issue. Uh, he goes, "I almost didn't want to take a gig where the remote guest was on Wi-Fi, and when you do get them to switch to hardwired, show day they revert back without you knowing." And that's yeah, if you're doing this as a profession, that's something you always want to watch out for. I can feel what Joe is saying. When I work with clients on remote, I drill it into their heads the importance of bandwidth. And again, people, because Wi-Fi is so easily available now, and you just kind of like it's there at all times, people don't realize that it's the quality of the signal and the throughput, and that especially with any kind of streaming, the packets have to arrive in order. Any interruption, you're gonna have that's when you have the glitches. I think people equate it to just web surfing, and if you're doing email, it doesn't matter what order the packets arrive. It gets assembled and you read your email. You don't see the interruption, but with Wi-Fi, and again, even if you're in the same room, it may work 80% of the time, but it's that one glitch, and then it can really affect your production, or it could go down entirely, and you can have some interference that is interfering with the radio signal. Remember, Wi-Fi is a radio signal, so it's prone to interference, and a lot of little things that. So when you have the wired, you're going to eliminate that, and that's why that's so important. It's funny. I work with clients, and it's like trying to get them to go wired. I know it's a pain, and it's like, you'll thank me later if you
Yep.
just go, especially if you do a regular show,
Yep.
those are the ones I try to get them to say, when you have time to get that Ethernet, and you'll thank me later. The occasional guest, that's a different story. You can really not gonna move them, but it's so important,
See, I
and
have
I can definitely feel what George is saying.
I have the problems with, veteran broadcasters that forget to turn off their VPN and they get on and they have like crazy video the whole time and they can't figure it out until they get off the show and they go, "Oh, I was on a
Wonder who
VPN."
that is.
It was
I don't know
encrypted
who
for a
that is.
special audience is what it was. Yeah, that is a great point. And
I'm
Mark,
just teasing.
you guys are making a great point. I know that, but here's the cool thing about what you're talking about is we forget how crazy, cool and innovative and complex the world of the internet really is. Packets, like you said, it's not like the signal goes in a linear motion between Louisville to Oakland, California. Those packets are going all over the country, and a lot of times they're going out of the country. They're bouncing off of servers in different places. And so there's already a lot going on there. And so then you added the complexity of somebody like me who forgets to turn off their VPN every now and then. Now you're going through a whole other realm. It could be another continent, it could be anywhere, right? So every one of those things will play into that. And I totally identify with what George is saying because people will either consciously or unconsciously go back to Wi-Fi because a lot of times, like especially with Apple, their stuff is designed to look for anything and grab onto it. It's like a tick sometimes,
Yep.
And so a lot of times you don't even know it's happened, and so you've got to be really aware and conscious and intentional about that.
No, and like he's absolutely right. I mean, we were talking before the show, and I completely lost my train of thought. Completely forgot what I was even talking about as to why one of the things with LinkedIn wasn't working. I just drew a blank, and I asked the guy. It must be one of those days, man. You just can't remember what you were just talking about 2 minutes ago. But one of the things that we do, I also stress to everybody, and this is something that I started doing, especially in my neck of the woods. We do get severe weather. We get it from time to time, and backup power. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and go get a whole house generator if you can afford it. Great. I mean, or go get a generator or something. But at the very least, protect your investment. You have, whether you have like a Wirecast gear that's almost $10,000, or you have a computer or Mac Pro, whatever you have, protect that investment. Every computer and workstation system setup that I have here is on a battery backup of almost an hour. I can get. Um, I have about 5 of them here in the studio, and yeah, that might sound overkill, but I might only have 3 or 4 computers on each of them with their monitors, so I can get the maximum out of that, 2 to 3 hour battery backup. And the reason for that is not so that I can keep doing the show, for hours and hours and hours afterwards, when the power goes out. But I have my internet connected to it. I have my studio lights connected to it, and I have all my gear that's basically producing the show connected to it, so that I can kind of wrap the show up in like a 3 to 5 minutes afterwards, be like, "Hey guys, I just lost power, so we're gonna have to kind of end the show early." All that hard work, guys, it might have been what 2 to 3 minutes left in the show, and now you lost the whole thing because everything just powered down. Plus, who knows what kind of damage could have been done? It could have been just a brownout. So having like a backup power system that has electricity regulators in it to keep you getting steady energy to your devices helps prolong the life of those devices as well. Um, a lot of people they do this for a living. George Kennedy's one. He's in the chat room here. Um, they can't afford not having backups or backup power and things like that. So you really need to consider whatever your production system is when, especially in a remote environment, whether you're at a church or you're at your own studio that you're building. Backup power should be on your priority list. Even if it gives you 15, 20 minutes, half hour tops, just enough so you can button up the show so you don't lose everything, shut everything
That's
down,
right.
protect your investment. So I think
Yeah,
that's
and
on my
one
list.
point. Yeah, no, and I think it should be on your list, Steve. One thing we got to keep in mind too with whole house generators, many of them don't turn on until after the power has gone off, and then there's a 15-second cycle to kick in. So if you go that route, or you have the kind of the luxury of doing that, you also have to just keep in mind that you still need that UPC in your work setting there that will hopefully keep things on for 30 minutes or something like that to help bridge that gap because the power is obviously heaving and going back and forth. And I mean, it's a real concern. It's rare that it happens, but depending on what mission critical is, it could be very important to you.
Yeah, Joe Zahitis, one of our mods, had a good comment here. UPS, best move I ever made. All power lines are above ground in my world.
Mm.
Line spikes are a regular thing. Have saved more times than I can count, which is very true. And you guys raised a good point. George Kennedy posts, $99 cyber power at Costco. Nice entry to keep things going. Good points on both of those. And like you said, Stephen, a lot of having that bridge where if you lose power, if you're in a critical situation, especially if you're doing a recording
Hmm.
and you want to avoid corrupting that recording, if you're taking video, at least it gives you time to kind of, oh, we lost power, button it up, and then safely power everything down. Gives you those critical few minutes, which is key in it, and that way you save your work. But a very good investment. Think of it as an insurance policy. And again, if you're a professional, it's probably mandatory, really, when you think about it.
Absolutely. And before we get into the last point, one of the things we do want to bring up, because it goes hand in hand, is the folks over at Telestream. And right now, if you head over to telestream.net and you click on the Wirecast, you can download a trial. You want to make creative and real high end video and be able to do it in a remote location in your studio, head on over to telestream.net. These guys have been awesome. They've been allowing us to do the show, and you can go to telestream.net/on social, click on Wirecast Studio or Pro. Mac or PC gives you a lot of different capabilities. If you want to go with the hardware, you can get Wirecast gear. But something we often overlook too is another product that I like to use in conjunction with Wirecast. That is ScreenFlow. And ScreenFlow, I've found, guys, is a great editing tool besides the screen capturing tool that it's intended to do for Mac only. This tool allows you to do a lot of editing and things, that are, I hate to say it like this because the pros are going to shoot me, but things that are really difficult to do in Final Cut, you can do very simply in ScreenFlow. So if you want to have a lot of editing features, both of these products should be on your to buy list. But if you want to have like the high end production like we have here, you definitely want to check out Wirecast. And there's a free trial, free 30 days. You can check it out. And we are testimonials. We use the product. I got the gearbox. We all got gearboxes in the house. We use it for our own productions, and that leads us into
Yeah.
our final um, point, Jeff. That goes with the equipment, right?
Well, I think there's a number of things we can talk about. I mean, I think, last week we talked about, the space that you're in, understanding what, the room looks like. I mean, the fundamentals have got to be in place with, visual clarity, good audio, and good lighting. And and I think that when you look at holistically what you're trying to do, you got to start. For me, I say it all the time. You got to start with the why. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, who has a whole methodology off of that. And so when you're looking at the environment that you're trying to create, the end product you're trying to create, I think you almost have to start with that in mind, with what that end product looks like, and then what you want to do, you back up from there. It's great to have the Starship Enterprise. I think all of us have got kind of a pseudo version of that. But I've got a little saying with that with great quantity of buttons comes great complexity. And I think that you have to start with what you can do most of the time by yourself. We don't have other people helping and pushing buttons and things. You have to have the ability to control the environment that you're in before you try to expand it. And so I think as you go forward in the kind of we call it the journey. It seems like the buzzword these days, everything's a journey. Um, you really got to kind of figure out where you want to start and where you want to end. And then from there, you can build out and then understand these other fundamentals have to be in place for production, for content, for creativity, and certainly things like the bandwidth and, just having the right structure in place to be able to support it with power, UPS and that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things Marty always laughs because I have a regiment that I do in the studio before every show. If you took my studio and you turned it sideways to where you're looking and you're seeing the cameras, or you see the monitors, then you see the cameras, and you see more monitors, then you see the computers, then you see my rack and the TV behind me. I go through and I start at the front, just like you would start at the front, work your way back, right? I go through, turn everything on. And I do that. I go the same. My wife, it drives her nuts because I walk the same path every time. And the reason is building up that muscle memory, right? You flip every light switch on for your studio lights. You flip every monitor on out there. You flip every camera on. You come to the front, you flip every TV on. Then you go down the bar here that I have, and you turn every computer and monitor and controller and everything on. And you go to the back and you turn all these. It builds up muscle memory so you don't forget to turn on pieces of gear, and you're ready to go, and you're like, oh, I forgot to turn that on. Or in
Yep.
cases even lower thirds, getting the right date on there, getting I try to do that right when I'm turning everything on, getting set up, or after the previous show. It depends if I already know what the subject's going to be. I think
Well, that's
doing
like,
that works.
yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, you're
but it
fine.
is like the safety check in the airplane before they take off. When you watch the pilots going down the list and they say flaps at 0 degrees, they can see that it's at 0 degrees, but they put their hand on it anyway. They're actually doing the muscle memory part of that to understand that as they go, they can remember where everything is. And I don't mean like they're forgetting it, but it makes it second nature that they know where things are set and they're double checking everything. And that does help because the thing is, the last minute, 2 minutes before the show, we've had this happen at times. Something goes wrong, you can at least say, okay, I know these things are not the problem. And by doing all of that, you're actually making it a lot faster for recovery and hopefully one that, won't affect the production.
Yeah,
Well,
in the chat here, Joe Zahidis and David Brewer both concur. Do it the same way every time, like you're saying, Stephen. Following that checklist, do it every time. Make sure you go through it. It may sound silly to some people, that why do I have to be so regimented? But if you forget one little thing, it could crash your production. And there's a reason, kind of being, really stick to the script there. It saves you a lot of hassle later on. You just make sure everything's, especially in your case, Stephen, the more complex studios and more equipment that you add, the more important that workflow, that rehearsed workflow is.
well, I
And
had to
so
do
just
it
do it the same
just
way every time, you're good.
just after moving, right? I'm in a whole new house,
Yeah.
new studio, new setup, so I had to relearn all that. But I also think doing this goes back to one of your points, Marty, about your guests. Don't wait till it's time to get your guests on to turn everything on, because then you're
Yeah.
troubleshooting everything at once. Know that
Yep.
your stuff works. I think I even have in my notes here 1 to 2 hours before is what I like to do, because you never know. Windows is got a mind of its own sometimes, and it always wants to do an update when you don't want it to do it. So I like to turn it on. I'm down here doing my work. I'll look at my clock. It's like, oh, almost 11 o'clock on a show day. I like to flip everything on. After it's been sitting for like 5 or 10 minutes, I'll come over and look at it. Oh, there's an update for this. And if it's a Windows update, I do the update. If it's an update that I really shouldn't be doing before a show, then I don't do it. I just hit cancel. But what it does is allows you to make sure everything is working properly. All the computers are booted up, because you may be like me and you're using, like I'm using the Wirecast gear to make my background. Well, if all of a sudden there's an update to Windows that I got to do, and then I decide to do it 5 minutes before the show, and it's one of those massive updates, I may not have a background, or I have to
Well, you have
delay
a
the show.
background, it'll just say 18 minutes remaining.
Yeah, well, exactly. It could be one of them. So if you start it up, it sounds really ridiculous, 1 to 2 hours before. Doesn't mean you have to sit here and do absolutely nothing. Set it up in the background, turn it on, walk back, go back to doing your work, and get it running because it's just like a car. You let a car warm up, it performs really nice. It's nice and warm when you get in there. Kind of the same thing here. Like I like to get it up, get it running, make sure there's no surprises. I guess that's the ultimate lesson if I could give one with doing I guess my walkthrough is I don't want
I mean, my
surprises.
in prepping for this show, I have a 2-hour timer that goes off so this show goes on at 2 at noon. And the green screen I'm using, I don't normally keep that set up. It's a portable green screen. So there's a whole procedure. I make sure I set up my green screen, turn on the Wirecast gear, turn on my PTZ camera, test everything, make sure everything's working. There's no updates, and then okay, good. And sometimes I'll do it so far in advance where I'll shut everything down again. I know okay, everything works. I leave everything set up, and then set it up again, leave it running a half hour before. I usually have everything running at least by 1 o'clock, and then I'm doing it like you said, Steven, I'm doing other work. And then when you send me, and then normally we're connecting about 30 minutes before, 20, 30 minutes before we connect, we have a little chat. But you have it every step of the way. There's part of the countdown, and you do. It doesn't mean like you said that you have to sit here and do nothing. No, but at least you know that
Yeah.
it's working. Believe me, it is worth it every single time because I mean you've run into this, Steven, where you've gone through your checklist and there might be a problem
Yeah.
and it comes up, but at least you buy yourself some time, and it's usually something small, but you buy yourself some time. You're not rushing at the last minute,
And
which is very,
Yeah.
very important.
and you could use that
Yeah. I
half
mean, and
hour.
for me, yeah, for me, I don't turn my gear off. I mean, it literally stays on all the time because I'm always working. I work nights a lot of times along with, the day and stuff. So, for me, unless I have to reboot, that's usually maybe the only thing that happens there. But I like what Dave Brewer and Michael Quist are saying too, because I do this a lot too. Create yourself your own private Facebook page or group,
Mm,
and you can broadcast into that, test your streams, see what it looks like, see what it sounds like. Because remember, whether it's Wirecast or anything else, the difference with digital technology going outbound is we used to have in the broadcast world, you could, get one last look at everything before it goes out. And you can do that to some degree, but we don't have the confidence monitors the way we did then because things have to stream first. 20 seconds later, you get it back and you kind of see what it looks like. That private group makes it really, really interesting and really um, well-rounded for your production because you can now hear and see what things look like, make some adjustments, and you can invite the people that you want in there. If it's just other friends or guests, that may be on the future, and you want to do a test stream, it's a great idea.
yeah, absolutely. And I think too, one final thought is with when you got show notes. We have show notes here that we put together, whether it's myself, Marty, or Jeff. I have 4 points on this. And what I like to do in that half hour when I know everything's working and everybody's just kind of relaxing so we can kind of go into the show understanding where we're at. I like to do like I did today and I say, "Okay, you know, Marty, you do a lot with podcast guests, so I'd like you to kind of go over the guest portion of this." And Marty's like, "Oh yeah." Meanwhile, they've already had these notes I think a couple days ago, right? And then I say to Jeff, what do you want to do out of the other three ones? And Jeff goes, well, I could hit bandwidth or I can hit, whatever. What that does is it gives you an idea of how the flow of the show can go. And you're not sitting there just kind of going, well, who's going to talk about that next? Or you run over everybody. Like Jeff knows he's going to do the first and the last point. Marty knows he's on the second point or whatever, however it works out on your paper. And I'm on the third point. We know because we've already outlined it like that. So we know that, okay, Marty's going to cover the main point of this. We're just going to kind of add commentary, or Jeff's going to cover the main commentary on this. And we're just going to add, our inputs or whatever. That's part of that pre-show prep, that pre-prep of everything. Get your guests comfortable because if they're frazzled and they don't know, or your co-host, and they think you're going in blind, now you're not everybody's going to have Jeff, where Jeff could probably carry it even if he was going in blind because he's a trained broadcaster.
You'd be surprised.
Well,
You know, trouble happens at every step of the way. That is the difference with live streaming versus a lot of traditional media production, in studios and things. I mean, people know not to mess with stuff. but you've got a lot of variables that come into play because we use our computers for things other than just this one thing. And so, patches happen, updates happen. I updated to Catalina 3.5 weeks ago, thinking I would take the leap at this moment. I had some software I wanted to use with it, Cinema 4D and things. And I've realized I probably shouldn't have done that. My audio device that I paid $500 for 3 years ago now doesn't work, so I had to get a Scarlett and things. So there's a lot of things that can change in a moment that you don't really think about, and then come the time you want to do your show, all of a sudden you are frazzled. And what does that do? Even if you recover, your interview is going to suffer because of that. Because now you've got one eye thinking about some version release, and the other eye you're thinking about. So tell me what it was like to be in Peru, and it doesn't work real well.
Real quick, I know George had a quick question that we can answer, and then we're going to wrap up. How far are you away from your green screens? We'll start with Jeff.
Me, I can put my arm out. I'm 6'3", 6'8" with the hair, and I can touch it right here. So it's about 3.5 foot away. I'm at a desk. I call this my live desk. I've got another one that's a little bit bigger, but yeah, it's not that far away.
Marty?
I'm touching mine right now.
So about
So I'm
arm's length.
away. Yeah, about a yard away.
And I cheat. I don't have a green screen behind me. I actually have a TV. So here's another view that you guys can see. That it's actually a TV that's behind me. So just looks really good, doesn't it? it's a good cheat. But so I can put whatever I want back there, and I don't have to worry about not having the light because of the way my studio is. I got a lot of light, but it's just I don't use green screens a lot. So, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, about green screens. Traditionally you were taught 10 foot off of a green screen so that you could light your talent, then you could have a nice even look on the green without the green like washing back on top of you, that kind of thing. These days, it's a little bit easier to do that. In my particular room in here, I've got 6 lights, and they're LED, so they're more soft and things. And it's just a nice even feel. I like the TV look, which has got that more Today Show kind of a shine to it. But the thing is, what you really want to do is make sure at a minimum that the green is as evenly lit as it can be, and that there's no wrinkles in the fabric and things like that. I'm actually using chroma key paint, which is a thing. Green paint won't work nearly as well as this, believe it or not, because I started with green paint and it didn't work the right way. So, but this is the kind of thing that removes one part of that equation. You just want to make sure you've got it lit really nicely, and it'll work great.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeffrey Fitzgerald from jeffandhighdef.tv. You guys can look him up if you got other questions. I know he's more than willing to help you. He's always in the different forums. Or maybe you have a project that you'd like to consult with him on. Hit him up. Also, I want to thank Mr. Marty McPadden from podjam.tv. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And guys, we really appreciate everybody coming on here. Any of us, you can look us up on the internet. Find us everywhere. We're pretty much everywhere in the broadcast forums and whatnot. Look me up with the Tech Buzz. Guys, we will see you next week for more On Social. Really appreciate you guys coming out. Send in those emails. We want to know what you guys want us to talk about. We've got some ideas coming up for the next couple weeks. We've got some ideas, so there's got some good content coming. So let us know in the comments if you like the content today. Really appreciate it. It helps us gauge what we should do next. So leave your comments in the content field down below. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.